minutes. We'll just get started now. So, welcome. I'm going to be talking today about pen test war stories and then easy ways to make my job harder. Primary reason for this is I do a lot of pen testing, and I've been seeing pretty much repeat trends when we're doing external and internal network assessments. Not going to be talking about phishing, not going to be talking about web apps, just kind of internal, external, and then pivoting once you're on the internal network. And we've been seeing a lot of repeat vulnerabilities that I don't want to talk about people's patching programs per se, but more or less kind of some configuration vulnerabilities or issues that they haven't really deployed their environment as secure as it should be. And these are pretty easy ways for us to get in. So just starting off, who am I? Security consultant with Rapid7. My name's Aaron. I have the obligatory Aaron because someone's going to say it before me, so I got the punchline there. Previously worked as a Linux administrator, and then I moved to the financial sector as a security analyst for a little while. But again, now with Rapid7, been doing pen testing there for a while. So yeah, we're going to start it off with a story. Since I said there's going to be war stories, those are usually the most fun part. Like I said, I love my job, but lately things have been getting very repetitive. It's become a trivial process to break into networks. And it's not every company, but most of the time when I'm set with an external network and then I'm supposed to, try and get into the internal network and then get the sensitive data, we get there 9 times out of 10. And it's because of, again, trivial things. I don't want to say stupid things. I don't want to put anyone down, but they're pretty basic issues that really should be patched. And so I wanted to bring them up in this presentation so that hopefully you can use them in your network to make it more secure. So yeah, going into the story. At a high level, we had an external network test, maybe 5 months ago. And we were given permission by the client if we got into the internal network to go as far as we wanted. And so about the first hour of testing, we started our service enumeration on the external network, and we're looking for things to hack into. And we also start doing password spraying at that point and trying to get into exposed portals, VPN, Outlook, Citrix, anything like that, anything we can use to pivot internally. And so in the first hour, we found some weak domain passwords, we got into the network, and now we're on the internal network. So we call up the point of contact, and he's like, oh, okay, you're on our internal network, but we've segmented our network. We have a healthcare data environment, and that has all of our patient records. So if you can get into that, that's a big issue, but you're just on a corporate network. That's no big deal. So we call them back 30 minutes later and say, hey, we're in this primary database called healthcare database. We're looking at about 250,000 records. Was that critical enough? And they gave us kind of a stop sign at that point. Stop hacking our network. Stop. And it was all before lunch on the first day of our test. And not to say they had bad security. They had a really rigorous patching program, but there was just a few poor things that weren't, things that were poorly implemented that we were able to exploit and quickly move through their network. So this whole talk is going to be going over, again, some of those really basic things that we find. So track summary, I'm not even going to start here again. External network, internal network segmentation. So starting with the external network. Top 3 ways I like to get in, outside of, exploiting unpatched machines, which isn't very common to find machines externally facing that you can, pull an RCE off of, because if you can, then I'm pretty sure they're already compromised and you won't be the first person to plant your flag there. So top 3 ways I like to get in that aren't often thought about: weak domain passwords with weak egress filtering, lack of multi-factor authentication. Unfortunately, a lot of companies don't MFA everything that's external and employee resource, and then exposed web administrator panels. Starting off with weak domain passwords. Passwords are the downfall of every company who uses them solely for their security. If you're relying on your passwords to protect, your sensitive servers, protect your external network from someone getting on the VPN, then you're probably going to fall prone to one of our common attacks on how we get into the internal network. Ways we usually discover them: weak passwords, password spraying, and then a lack of network egress controls. So starting off, password spraying, first thing you have to do is build a user list, and you want to go online, do open source intelligence to try and find as much as you can about that company and their employees. So we looked at LinkedIn, we looked at Facebook, we looked at Twitter, and we try and take employee names and we put them into the formats that they're most likely signing in with. So let's say they use first initial, last name, so J Smith. We're going to try J Smith and then a bunch of other names we find, put them in that format, and password spray against portals. Also, you have document metadata, Google dorking. You can extract information from document metadata to get their username format as well if they're using something very obscure where it's not like a first name, last name. So you can look around at that to build your initial list before you start password spraying. You can also do active reconnaissance. So one way to do that is Outlook web access. There's a timing attack out there where you can spray the Outlook portal with just accounts, and it'll come back and tell you if those accounts are valid or not. So then I can take the census data for the past 30 years, spray it against it with possible username formats, and see if any come back valid. so I can try and get into Outlook. And then also company login portals that give verbose messages saying, this user is invalid instead of an invalid user or password was entered. So extracting metadata. I really like this one because a lot of companies, well, not a lot of companies, but some companies think they're tricky and they go, oh, we don't use a common username format. Instead, we come up with a special username format that is not related to their name, and so you're never going to find it for password spraying. And they think that's their bulletproof, security by obscurity. Well, document metadata. If you have Microsoft Word documents or Microsoft Office documents out on the internet, you can just Google Dork, you type site, and then the site you're looking at. So you pick a company, and then you type file type, and then doc. It's going to list all their doc or .x files out there. You can right-click on them, go to details, and if they haven't scrubbed the metadata, you'll have the username right there. So you can see, like, they're using, it's AIUHT18. Sorry, can't read it in the back. That's one of the usernames, and it was last saved by Julie, and then I just blurred out the last name. But obviously, Julie, her name isn't in the author section, but it was a way we figure that out. And often when companies do, or use this format, they do it through an iteration. So I might password spray now AIUHT1 through 10,000 and see how many hits I get. And, slightly modify the end to see how many valid hits I might get during a password spray attack. So PyFoca or Foca, it's a really good tool to go out and just mine the internet, go to Google, go to Bing, look for these documents, and extract that information for you. It'll download the documents, extract the metadata, and tell you everything it can find about that company. Active reconnaissance. So this is where you're no longer doing open source intelligence gathering. You're actually hitting their portals. If they have a WAF or they're monitoring their external environment, then they're more likely going to catch you at this point. But for some reason, people like to monitor only their VPN portals and not so much their Outlook web access portals. Or what they deem less sensitive. Well, OA is really sensitive in my opinion. So yeah, this is, active reconnaissance. You can see user does not exist in this test portal we have. It's very common to see that though on homegrown websites where they just straight out tell you this isn't a valid user account. That's great. I spray it with a bunch of information. I get valid user accounts that way. And the Outlook timing attack I was talking about, if you have an OA portal exposed externally, and this Metasploit module to do it, you can spray the list of usernames that you have, and if you get a return within 0.2 seconds, it's a valid username. If the return is 4 seconds or longer in the response time, then you know it's invalid user. It's just the way the Outlook goes back and queries the domain controller and doesn't have that user cached anywhere, knowing them as a valid user. So once you have your giant user list, the next thing you do is start password spraying. So we like to call it password spraying the seasons because users are predictable. Users love to use passwords that rotate with your 90-day rotate policy. So season year, very common. Summer 2017 has gotten me DA so many times this year. It's sad, but it's true. Along with welcome company, so welcome 2017 for new employees who haven't changed their password, or company name 2017, so like Rapid7 2017. Again, very common passwords. Help desks like to set them during the resets, and users don't like to change them because, I can remember that. So we start spraying those passwords on the portals, looking for any valid hit with all those user accounts we just figured out. Tools, you can use Burp Suite, you can use Metasploit, MyBFF, which is something written, one of our guys at Rapid7 wrote that, and it basically does a bunch of different login portals. You can do Outlook, you can do Citrix, you can do VPN portals. He has a lot of different timing attacks built in there as well. Anything that does user enumeration that's a publicly known product, he has that built in there for active user enumeration. So, getting into a war story after the boring spiel. Cheers to summer 2017. Like I've said, summer 2017 has been great this past summer for getting domain admin or just getting into a network to begin with. This is stupid simple. It sounds like how could this be considered hacking? It's not, and this is why I said my job is getting boring. It's more of just guesswork and getting into your network, and I don't even feel good about it anymore. So assessment story, we had this company, and they only had 100 users on LinkedIn, but they had a VPN portal and didn't have two-factor authentication. They also had an Outlook portal. We knew their VPN portal they were constantly monitoring for failed login attempts, so if we tried to password spray it, we'd get blocked immediately. They weren't monitoring Outlook. We just threw a few random attempts at it from one of our bogus IP addresses to see if they blocked it, and they didn't. Perfect, great. I don't need a botnet to spray your portal now. I'm just going to use my own host. So we started spraying against it with the password summer 2017. And of the 100 accounts we had, 10 of them, I kid you not, 10 of them were using the password summer 2017. And we got in. And one of those users was a DBA. And so we get into the VPN. So what we do is we try it on the Outlook portal. When we get the success, then we go over to the VPN portal and just sign in. And so we sign in as this DBA user. And the next thing we do is we spray his password across the entire network. We're not trying to be too stealthy at this point. It's like a 4-day test. So it's not a red team assessment. It's just an external assessment. So they weren't trying to block us at that point. So I could spray the password. If I was doing a red team, I'd go a lot slower. But anyway, we spray his whole password across a bunch of their /24 subnets, find 4 servers he can log into as an admin user, log into him as the admin user, and then you can dump credentials from clear text in memory. I'll talk about that later. Dump some creds from clear text in memory. There's a domain admin password stuck in memory. Grab that. Now we're DA. We make a backdoor domain admin account, call up our client, and where do you want us to go from here? You want to start looting data, or is it stop? Is it mercy rule? So weak domain passwords, remediation. I know it's hard to hear when you tell your users you want them to have 12-character passwords, but it's kind of what you should be shifting towards. NIST is going to release a new framework next year that says no longer are we looking at these 8-character passwords using leet speak that are super complex to remember. They're actually moving more towards let's have longer passwords for general users that are passphrases. Think in terms of passphrases. You don't need to have 1,000 @ symbols in there, exclamation points everywhere, carets. Just have a long password of seemingly random words and a passphrase that a user can easily remember. Privileged accounts, you should have 16 characters, and for administrators, we usually recommend 20. Also, on your domain controller, if you're using Windows environment, which everyone pretty much is, you can set up scripts on there that prohibit the use of common words such as season 2017, or season year, company name, password, welcome. So blacklist all of those common words and go back to your users and do a lot of user training saying, try to pick words that that you can easily remember and just chain a bunch of them together. Stop using one word and a date on the end. And then again, do not rely solely on security or usernames and passwords for your security, because do multi-factor if you have external portals. I'll rant on that in a little bit. The next part is weak egress filtering. So I've talked about password spraying, but what's a good way to get password hashes sent out to you without looking like you're spamming their network with a bunch of password spraying? And so weak egress filtering, if your network allows port 445 to egress over the internet, which is SMB, there's a great attack where you can do it in Internet Explorer, you can do it through Outlook. If you can get someone to download an HTML image tag or open it on a Microsoft product, it's going to connect out to your server over SMB. Great thing about Windows, they'll automatically authenticate. They'll send an NTLM-v2 hash right out to the internet, and now you have that hash and you can crack it offline. So we'll get into how that works. Metasploit rogue SMB server. So you can use Metasploit framework for this. You basically set up your SMB listener on a public IP address. You're listening on port 445, and you're waiting for someone to connect to you. And you give them a challenge, because when someone reaches out to you and they say, I want to connect to your SMB share, if you respond with, okay, please encrypt your password with this challenge, then they're going to do it. So you send them a challenge. Since you know the challenge, it's easier to crack it. And so you got to now get them to access your server. How do you do that? I don't consider this phishing by sending it through an email. Some people are saying, "Oh, you're tricking users, sending them an email." Well, it's technically it's a technical control. It's the fault that you should not be letting SMB egress over the internet. Heck, ISPs protect home users by, like my ISP, Comcast, back at home. They don't allow 445 over the internet unless you're a business user, because they know how dangerous it is. So why should you be doing that in your network? Why should you be letting anyone egress to that port and egress with SMB? And all the user has to do here, if you send them an email with an image tag embedded right in it, they have to click download images in Outlook. That's it. It connects back out and gives us their NTLM-v2 hash. So I created a little plugin for it because Outlook is a major pain to plug in HTML to it or write HTML bodies. So I made this little smiley face button because it makes me laugh every time I do it. And I put it in my end of day status, or I put it, I'll send it to, once I get approval, I always ask for approval on an external test just because some people do think this is phishing. I really don't. So I explain it to them, get the approval, and then we'll send that image over and see if anyone downloads it. So this is what happens when you capture the NTLM-v2 credentials. I had to redact a lot of it, but basically you get the SMB, request, and then you get the LM hash, NT hash, and the challenge, which all together form the NTLM-v2 hash. Then you can crack it with something like OCL hashcat. It really doesn't take that long to crack. We were using word list, epic list, which is like billions of words, and then running it against a rule set on top of that to do millions of permutations against it. We exhausted the list in like 31 minutes. This was just one of the passwords out of, I think it was like 500 we were cracking at that time. So yeah, it's not that hard to crack NTLM-v2 hashes if you have a decent rig for it. And getting a little bit more into why I don't think this is a phishing attack and more of just a vulnerability to your configuration. Because if you can make an email trusted, if it's sent from an internal sender and it's trusted, then it'll automatically download image content. So we had one pen test recently, and the client said, okay, you can find 3 users on the internet and send them this SMB image tag. We'll see what happens. So we found 3 users. We sent nothing in the email body, nothing in the email subject line. We sent it from a random Gmail account, and all it had was the little red X box that was like a non-downloaded image. And they thought, oh, this is weird. We think it's phishing. So they forwarded it to their internal SOC team. Go back to what I just said. If it comes from an internal sender, it immediately becomes trusted. So they sent it to their entire security team as phishing, and when you go to forward that, Outlook pops up and says, do you want to send with all body content? And they click yes. Well, that instantly downloads the image. It connects out to my server, I get their hash, goes to their SOC team. Their SOC team only has to click in the preview pane, and all of their hashes came back. So we were only expecting to get 3 user hashes, and we got about 20, and they were all privileged accounts. Their SOC team had no clue. And we knew they had no clue because we were in their email accounts at this time through looking at their emails they were sending back and forth saying, why'd you send us this as phishing? We don't see anything wrong with it. So we're sitting there in their accounts, and so once we had access to those, we migrated over to their vulnerability management server because, Rapid7, Nexpose, if they have Nexpose, I want to get into it, it's fun. They all had access to it, so we logged into their Nexpose server and started looking at all the vulnerabilities they had already scanned on their network, and then used those to move to domain admin, because, yeah, we could. So, I'm not saying we have a backdoor. I'm saying we use their accounts to sign in I don't want any misinterpretation there. Weak egress filtering remediation is, just block SMB, block protocols going to the internet that you don't need going to the internet. And also you should do it on host-based firewall rules as well. It's not enough just to block it in your corporate environment, because what I like to do is target Joe Bob, who likes to go to the coffee shop every day, and he works remotely. Well, he's no longer protected by your network egress rules. And if you don't have that host-based set up, then I'm just going to use his account, or I'm going to target him, send him one after hours, maybe when he's at home, and try and get that egress filtering out over the internet. Again, it's not going through your internal network segmentation at that point, or your egress rules. So do it host-based as well. Alright, so now getting on to my rant on lack of multi-factor authentication. Rapid7 released this paper called Under the Hoodie. I don't know if anyone's seen it. It basically goes over kind of what's in this talk, and a bunch of other stuff, but we took statistics of a whole quarter worth of pen testing and said, what were the most common ways we got in, what kind of security controls do people have in place, and surprisingly, 76 clients we tested out of 124 sampled did not have multi-factor on their external resources. When we see that, that's probably 76 that we got to the internal network on, to be honest. And not all pen tests were, scoped that way. We only had 17 that were affirmatively able to say yes, that we saw they had multi-factor. And what I keep getting at is email, VPN, and Citrix, or any other portals, if they're not multi-factored, I can use all of those to get into an internal network. Pretty much any hacker worth their salt can use those 3 to get into your internal network if they can log into them externally. VPN, straightforward. If I can log into it without multi-factor, easy enough. I'm now, I have part of your internal network access. Citrix, there's escaping Citrix sandboxing. There's plenty of ways to do this. I'm not going to go into them. If you want a good talk to look at, Escaping Alcatraz by Kirk Hayes, one of the Rapid7 guys, just does a ton of talks, or a ton of demos on how to escape Citrix sandboxing technology to get on the actual the Citrix host itself. But one I really do want to point out here, because no one thinks about it, is Outlook Web Access. How can you use that to get to an internal network? We use Outlook in the cloud. How can that get to our internal network? Well, fun fact. Outlook forms sync across clients. So, an Outlook email form, when you get a new meeting request and the body looks different, the user interface looks different, that's the form design. And if someone creates a new form, use under your user account, it'll sync. So if I have Outlook open and I create that new form, because I'm logged in on your account, it'll sync up to your cloud host, or it'll sync up to whatever you're using for Outlook, and then go down to your client, your workstation. So your physical fit client for Outlook. So that form will be there. Another fun fact. Outlook forms can trigger PowerShell code. Anyone see where I'm going with this? You can take the PowerShell code and stick it in the Outlook form, and if you can trigger that form on the user's workstation, which you've just synced down onto it, which is probably in the corporate internal network at that point in time, and then you send them an email, which triggers that form. It doesn't have to have anything. All they have to do is double click on the email, make it open, boom, it triggers the PowerShell code. If I'm going to use like a PowerShell Empire stager, something to connect back to my host, I'll do it encrypted over 443. It's going to look like HTTPS, so your egress rules usually aren't going to catch it. Obfuscated a little bit to get around antivirus, and it almost always works unless you're disabling PowerShell on user workstations. And the final fun fact about that, SensePost, a security group, they automated this in a tool dubbed Ruler. The attack's been around for a while, but it's kind of a pain to manually do. They now created a tool, which you just put in the username and password, point it at the server, and about 2 seconds later, it finishes the process for you. Now, picture of that, I'm sorry, this was like the best picture I could find without using one from a recent test. No enhance. What it's basically doing is it logs into the Outlook server, it creates a new form, creates the new uploads PowerShell code that you specify to that form, and then it sends the email that triggers that, and you wait for them to open it. And you get a shell. So, again, going into another story, we had a client recently who had multi-factor on everything. They were like, we got you. Citrix, VPN, a couple admin portals they had exposed, everything but Outlook. Because again, I don't know why people don't think Outlook is that valuable. But you're sending internal emails all the time with that sensitive information, with attachments, with, I can now get into your web, or get into your servers through it, or get into your laptop, sorry. But one thing they did properly was they had all of their client workstations disable PowerShell. Normal users don't need to run PowerShell, so now my PowerShell executable didn't work. So we tried a few other things, had no luck. I mean, I could use that as a launched phishing attack and send an internal email from somebody to another person, and, try and do phishing that way. But instead, we decided to start looking for multi-factor authentication codes that were maybe stored in email, or could we re-register this guy with a new multi-factor and sync it to our phone? Kind of learn what multi-factor solution they were using. Didn't find anything in his email history. So we said, screw it. You know what? Let's just see what happens. We went to the Citrix portal we were trying to log into, and the VPN required a certificate and a one-time passcode, so that was we weren't getting into that. But the one-time passcode at Citrix, when we logged in, it pops up, we get one-time passcode, we're like, okay, now what? We look back at his email. The guy configured his multi-factor authentication request to go to his email. So then we had access to Citrix. Everything's multi-factor and backdoor. Took the backdoor, got into Citrix that way, and the only thing this guy was allowed to run was Visual Studio. So if you can run Visual Studio on a server, interact with it through Citrix, then I can just compile a code, right? So I just threw in some C# code, threw in a Empire payload in there, set it to tie into the .NET framework, so it wasn't actually calling through PowerShell, just calling .NET directly. But looking like it was PowerShell, and ran my code, got a shell back on their Citrix server. Now I was internal, and I started pivoting. So yeah, multi-factor everything if you're going to have it externally. So the remediation, again, enforce MFA on everything, require the MFA to be sent to a physical device or have a physical device on the person, like a key they plug in, and also prohibit MFA tokens from being sent to email. And the last one, quick little rant on exposed administrator panels. So admin panels are basically something that gives extra functionality to a website, and if you have them exposed externally, I don't know why. People don't need to be doing administrative tasks externally on your websites or on your servers, just going directly to them. Make them VPN and then work on that if they have to work on them remotely. Don't expose them externally. Because if they're exposed externally, they're a highly valuable target, and we're going to find a way to get into them. People study all the time, WordPress admin, you see new vulnerabilities for WordPress all the time. PHP MyAdmin, printers out there, that you can get into the admin portals exposed. So put those on your internal network, make people VPN to get into them. The most common one that we like to exploit, though, a lot of people know not to put WordPress or PHP MyAdmin exposed externally. Custom administrator panels, though, for your in-house web applications that you've developed. We find those often have some good functionality that we can play with. So leading into the next story, we had a administrator panel exposed for this company. And it pretty much, we told the point of contact, we got into it, and we wanted to start messing with the configuration settings. And he told us, okay, don't break anything, but honestly, all you can do is update, content. So you could deface one of our websites. It's not a big deal to us. We went, okay, that's fine. Let's, since he gave us the green light to kind of mess with the configuration, we weren't gonna, put an XSS on their page. That wasn't the point of the assessment. We're not trying to attack their clients who are accessing the website. But instead, we found there was a log file location. And we could specify, that was the only real administrative task there, was to specify where a log output could go to. And it was for the Windows Event Log Manager. And so we set that up as using one of our SMB tags, just using a UNC path back to our SMB server. It was a server in the DMZ, so we're crossing our fingers that they had 445 allowed out of it. Sure enough, they did. We put it in, we get a connection back. It's the domain administrator hash. The log file program they were running, which basically got synced to when we made this config change, was running as a domain administrator user on that workstation. And I don't know why, still to this day, I don't understand it. Domain admin had access to the VPN. So we VPN'd in and we were domain admin, and it, again, was right before lunch. So, don't expose administrator panels, keep them internally. And now let's move on to the internal network. So talk about a few ways we get into the internal network. What do we do once we're there? How do we try to move as quick as we can and escalate our privileges within the network? Common ways: lack of principal of least privilege, legacy broadcast protocols, SMB signing disabled, cached credentials in memory, and then insecure storage or insecure password storage and group policy preferences. So first one, I'm not going to really go into a lot on this, but it's going to come up in all the other findings. If you aren't following a principle of least privilege, if you're allowing your employees to all have local admin on their workstation, and you're allowing domain admin accounts to log into that workstation, well, if a domain admin logs into a workstation and someone has local admin on it, they can just start a process as a system user, migrate into that domain admin process, and assume their privileges on the domain and create a backdoor account right off of it. So really having that separated segmentation of user access helps prevent privilege escalation through the network. So limit local admin access. Admin accounts should not be used for general business tasks. You shouldn't be running as a domain admin or server admin user checking your Outlook email. And you should also break administrative accounts into 3 tiers so that if one tier gets compromised, it's not going to be used to get to the next tier. So workstation administrator accounts, again, seldom used, but have your workstation admins can only log into certain workstations. Your server administrators can only log into servers. Your domain admins can only log into the domain controllers. Don't let a domain administrator log back into a server. Because again, that same scenario, if they log into a standard server, and somebody else was able to, get a shell on it because Eternal Blue, MS, 1710, something like that, their system level access and your domain account or domain admin logs into it, they now have access to your domain admin account. And so yeah, that'll come out in all the other vulnerabilities. So let's skip over to legacy Windows broadcast protocols. This is just like a classic show up, plug your laptop in, get hashes, and crack them. If you're running LLMNR and MBTNS, which is default on Windows 7 and below, I think it was introduced in XP, then it's basically sending broadcast requests over the entire internal subnet you're on, looking for file shares or looking for trying to resolve host names when DNS fails. It's a backup to DNS. And we can use this to trick the server and say, I'm the file share instead, connect to me. And again, back to the whole SMB authentication. As you can see, there's a pattern in a lot of this. Get someone's credentials and then use them. It's all the tricky ways we can get your credentials, basically. So, poisoning LLMNR and MBTNS, the way we usually do it is the victim's going to reach out to the DNS server. Where's file share 01? DNS server's like, I don't know where file share 01 is. So the victim goes out to the /24 or whatever his broadcast network range is and says to everybody, does anyone know file share 01? And if you're running as the attacker, you go, I'm file share 01, connect to me, send me your credentials. And you capture them that way. And you can use this with Responder or Metasploit, 2 common tools used to exploit that. And this is the hash captured with Responder. Again, back to the principle of least privilege. This was just taken from a website blog talking about LLMR, WPAD, and MBTNS. But for their example, they used an administrator account for it. And if someone's running as an administrator account on that workstation when they make that request, you're now capturing those administrator hashes. If you had that principle of least privilege applied, then the impact would be much less. So remediating it, you can disable LLMNR and MBTNS on your workstations. You can push it out with group policy. And then also follow principle of least privilege to mitigate the impact if you really can't get rid of those protocols for some reason. Next one, SMB signing. When you have this set to disabled, it basically verifies an authentication request when you're conducting a man-in-the-middle attack and prevents someone from forwarding an SMB authentication request. It's a 16-year-old attack. It's been around forever, but no one ever sets SMB signing to required. Not sure why, but 9 times out of 10 when we're doing pen tests, we see it as not required. So how the attack works. You have the victim. He says, yo, can I authenticate over SMB to the attacker? Because you forced them to do it through an image tag, through Responder, whatever it is, you got them to authenticate to you. The attacker is like, yeah, sure, 1 second. Goes over to a target server with SMB signing disabled and says, hey, can I authenticate over SMB? The target's like, yeah, sure, encrypt your password with, this challenge. And the attacker's like, awesome, thanks. Goes back to the victim. Hey, victim, can you encrypt your password with this challenge that I just took from the target? And victim goes, sure. Victim sends back the encrypted challenge. The attacker relays that all the way to the target. Since there was no signing enabled, the target and the victim don't realize that, they're both talking to the guy in the middle. They just thought they were having the communication with the guy in the middle and didn't know it was being forwarded. And so you get access granted, with login, and if the account's an administrative user, you can use psexec or, running commands over SMB, to execute commands on the target host. and it will run as system if they're an administrator user. So, quick example of it. We set MultiRelay up. It's part of the responder toolkit. And it's basically listening for any user admin that connects to us. So we're doing responder against the whole network, poisoning LLMNR and MBTNS. We're targeting a specific server there, 10.0.0.171. They had SMB signing disabled or set to false. And we were able to basically capture credentials from the victim when they connected to us, forward them to the server, and all of a sudden we have a command line access at the local system user over our target. So this is often used when they have really strong passwords and we can't crack those NTLM-V2s, and it's a great way just to forward it instead of wasting the time on cracking it. So we had an engagement recently. One thing I love about my job is we get some really fun clients, and especially when they're repeat clients, they just, maybe there's arrogance to it. We like to go back and forth and be like, they'll come to us, oh, I bet you can't crack my password this time. We fixed everything from your last report. You're not getting in. And we're like, okay, well, we'll see if we can. And so we had this one client, really good relationship with him, loved the guy. And he comes up to us on the first day. It was just internal on-site, so we're just plugging into their network, doing the internal pen test. And he's like, hey, so basically we disabled that responder stuff. We disabled LLMNR and MBTNS, so good luck getting my hash now. But even if you get it, we all have 20-character passwords. They're random. You're never getting in. I was like, okay, great. What about the SMB signing thing? Did you disable it? Well, no, but it's okay for now. It's later on the roadmap. Well, okay, what about principal of least privilege? Are you still running with an administrator account on your machine? Oh, that's for next quarter. We'll fix it, but it's no big deal. You're never going to crack that password. Well, we told him about these before. I guess the impact risk there need to be demonstrated a little bit further. So he walks back to his desk thinking, they're stumped. They're not going to come up to me in the first hour this time. And sure enough, about 30 minutes in, you can use EtterCap. Well, BetterCap is what we like to use. Basically do man-in-the-middle attacks against traffic. We're on the same local subnet as the guy. So we man-in-the-middle attacked all of his HTTP traffic going out to the internet. And we injected image tags into every HTTP response. And so in his browser, it's just constantly trying to render. And those image tags, the same ones we use to capture SMB hashes that I was talking about before, they're just connecting back to us. And we're forwarding this to the Carbon Black server, where he's an IT security guy. I bet you he has admin on Carbon Black. Sure enough, he did. So walk over to his office, lean up against the wall, and he's like, what's up? Oh, where's the bathroom at? I forgot where it's at. He's like, oh, it's right over there. And I'm like, okay, great. And by the way, we have domain admin. And I just walk off. And it was, again, we had a really good relationship with the client. That's why we were able to do that. But it kind of fun things like that, where we really need to demonstrate the impact of, they're seemingly simple, but they get overlooked all the time. A lot of these exploits are, configuration issues that we see. So, remediation, really simple. Set SMB signing to required on all hosts. If you can't do this, set them on as many hosts as you can. You can push it through group policy. So the next one, I keep talking about dumping credentials from memory. Well, Windows is awesome. They have a process called lsas.exe, and for your single sign-on, so when you're trying to access a file share on your network and you don't have to get prompted for credentials every single time, that's because Windows is handy and they cache your credentials in memory. And they cache them in clear text. So if someone can access the lsas.exe process in memory, do a proc dump on it, and then review it, they're going to pull out your password in clear text. Best thing about that, LSAS caches your credentials for every single user that's logged into that machine since the last reboot. So Mimikatz tool, basically to automate this whole process. And it requires administrator privileges on the host. Obviously, LSAS is running as the system user, so you have to get to a system level user to exploit it. But the Mimikatz is in a ton of different tools. Metasploit has it in the Interpreter shell, PowerShell Empire, CrackMap exec. It's in a ton of different tools. And they all have signatures built for them now, so AV is picking them up. But like I said, you can just use proc dump, a Windows sysinternal signed package, to dump LSAS and then just take it offline and analyze it, so AV doesn't know what's going on. This is a demo of it, kind of running here. You can pretty much ignore some of the top half, but down here you see the NTLM hash that was extracted, and then you kind of get the username, domain, and password taken right out of memory. Again, this was just a test instance. It isn't actual customer data. But this is a super easy way we use to move through the network and grab credentials. CrackMap exec, when I said spraying the network with login, if we have an administrator account, it basically, you give it a subnet, you give it a list of hosts, you give it an account that you think has admin on a bunch of them, and it tries to log into as many as it can. And if you have administrator access, it comes back and it's like, pwned, it has admin. It runs Mimikatz for you, stores all the credentials in a database. again, it's super noisy. We won't use it on a red team, but when you give us, 3 or 4 days to try and hack a network, we're going to try and move as quick as we can. So, story on that, spray and pray. We captured this user's password, and we were in the internal network using the password to try and get into a few different servers. And he could log into only, one server? I think it was just one. We log into the one server, and we were as an admin user, so we can dump the NTLM hash for the local admin user. If you can get to the system level, you can take SAM, which stores that hash, and then you can try and pass it, because NTLM hashes can be passed. They can be used for authentication over SMB. And so we took that password, and we're thinking, okay, if they didn't randomize local admin passwords on all of their servers, we can pass this to other servers. So we sprayed it with CrackMap and found about 8 servers that had the exact same local admin password, logged into them, used Mimikatz on it, and on one of them, all of a sudden, it was just like raining hashes. I'm talking hundreds of user hashes. Every single one we would have wanted to target to crack later. Just all of their domain users in clear text. Turns out it was the Exchange CAS server, so the Central Authentication server, which everyone authenticates through, which caches like everyone's credentials in memory if you don't have it set not to. And so yeah, we had pretty much every username and password for everyone on their domain in clear text. And usually we like to get the ntds.dit and start cracking those. We didn't have to do that because clear text. So remediation, pretty simple. Microsoft already pushed out a patch. Most everyone probably has it applied. If you keep up on patching, it was pushed out like 2012, 2013. But what a lot of people don't know is that you have to set the registry key at wdigest to 0. And if you haven't set that to 0, then you're still caching credentials in memory. The patch just allows you to set that, but you got to make that switch. And the other note is if you're using Windows 7, 8, 2008, or 2012, NTLM hashes can still be extracted. This just prevents the clear text, and NTLM hashes can be passed. So the only way to get away from this is to go up to Windows 8.1 and above, so Server 2016 as well, and that allows you to put LSASS into a restricted process mode. They introduced that new capability in the newer versions of Windows to say this is a restricted process. You can no longer access it even if you're the system user. It would require a reboot and registry key changes, and usually it gets set back, so you're not going to get into that restricted process at that point. All right, so our next finding, insecure password storage and GPP, group policy preferences. Microsoft in 2008 realized a lot of administrators were changing their local admin passwords using VB script on their domain controller, and they were pushing it out as a group policy to change everyone's password, but the local admin password on all the workstations, but they were storing that local admin password unencrypted because they were just using in-house scripts. So Microsoft came along and they went, okay, group policy, we're going to create one that allows you to hash passwords on sysvol in an XML file in AES 256-bit encryption. Okay, good on you, Microsoft. I mean, you're still using the same admin password everywhere. That's not great. But at least they gave the ability to hash or encrypt passwords. Well, then Microsoft, like they commonly do, they dropped the ball. In 2012, they disclosed the AES private key, which you can use to decrypt that on MSDN, public source to go get this information. And remember, this is stored in sysvol share on your domain controller. Every single user in your network has access to the sysvol share. So any domain user. And so a domain user can now go out to that share, grab the groups.xml file, and unencrypt it or de-encrypt it with the AES private key that was disclosed. So Metasploit has a module for it because they have a module for everything. And basically it goes out, if you get any username and password on the network, you can use them against the domain controller. It'll search for all the groups.xml files it can, and then start giving you passwords that are there. But this was all back in 2012, so it was a little while ago. And I'm just going to skip the story because we're running a little bit short on time. But basically, insecure GPP password storage, the remediation to it, what a lot of people didn't realize is Microsoft released a patch. Sorry, let me back up. They released a patch that stopped allowing users to store passwords in the groups.xml file. And they decided that's a bad idea. Now we're going to give you laps, which lets you randomize passwords on all your local workstations. But for some reason, a lot of companies, they didn't realize when you installed that patch, they thought, okay, we're great now. You can't decrypt it anymore. No, that's not what it did. It just made it so you can't store it. And they left that groups.xml file out on their domain controller. So it's still sitting there today. And that's what we often exploit. We come in, and if it's an old legacy AD environment that's maybe been migrated up to the latest versions, if that file's still sitting out there, and there still has that local admin password in the groups.xml file, we grab it, we decrypt it using the AES private key, and that gives us insight into what your password used to be, and 9 times out of 10, people are still using that same password across all their workstations. And usually it lets us get into, some of your servers or some of your workstations. And even if it's not all of them, if you started using laps on half of your domain, maybe the other half isn't fully upgraded yet, so we start, exploiting that area. So again, install the patch, delete the XML file, but please just use Microsoft Laps to randomize that local admin password. All right, so once we're in the network and we're in the internal network, we get domain admin. Now what do? You don't just stop at domain admin. That means nothing to a CEO. You show a CEO or a CFO, I've got domain admin. They go, what does that mean? So you want to demonstrate impact on every penetration test that you do. So we start looking for data. We obviously have to get permission to do this, but we want to find what are your juicy secrets. Are you a publicly traded company? If I steal your quarterly earnings before they get released, is that a big issue to you? Healthcare company, if I steal all your, healthcare files. And some companies have started setting up, best practice, as all companies should start doing. They segment their environments, and they have a secure area and a non-secure area. A secure network, non-secure network. And there's a couple ways we can pivot into those. So first one, VPN Split Tunneling, if it's turned on. So one way they separate the internal network from maybe the production secure network is by a VPN, and you have to sign into that VPN. They'll put multi-factor on it. It's different credentials being used. So if you compromise, the corporate domain, you can't use that to get into the other, more privileged domain. You don't know the password, you can't get multi-factor through. What you can do is piggyback on somebody using that VPN already if they have VPN split tunneling enabled. And also shared virtual center environments, and we'll dive into those. So VPN split tunneling, if you have a workstation on the internal network, and they're connected to the VPN at that time, they're connected to the production servers, but they're also talking to the corporate network, and you're an attacker, and you come along, and you have domain admin on the corporate network, that means you can probably log into that laptop they're using, which is on the corporate network. And since it's still communicating to the corporate network, you can connect to it and pivot all your traffic, because they're going to be dual homed with their NIC. They're going to have, one IP address range going out to corporate and the other range going to the production environment. And so you just pivot all your traffic through their machine. You route it that way, and now you're in the, production environment. You have access to those servers, which are supposed to be completely cut off. So disable VPN split tunneling. And we had recently a pen test, and they had the 2-factor set up on the VPN. They had their production network with all their customer data in a protected environment. And it was supposed to be super secure. Like, no ports were open from the corporate network into this except for the VPN tunnel, getting into the VPN. And that had, kind of like a 3-factor authentication. You had to have a certificate, you had to do a push request, and then you also had to have a username and password, which were for a different domain controller as well, different, domain altogether. And so we weren't getting into it. We hammered away at it for a little while. But then I realized that their domain, or their Active Directory structure told you what users had access through comments on all the user profiles. Who had access to that production environment. So I used Metasploit. I scanned the entire workstation network looking for logged in users who had access to production, found one user who had access into it, logged in, and so I used Metasploit and PSExec, the module inside it, to connect to a server, run a system shell on it, and then sure enough, he was connected to the VPN environment when I did that through his laptop. The other best part was it was a Windows laptop. They had a bunch of Linux servers in the corporate environment, and he had Cygwin installed. And so I dropped down into Cygwin, and all of his SSH keys were right there. And since he had previously authenticated with them and unlocked them, they all had passwords on them, but since, he had already unlocked them for the day and he had it set up that you didn't require the password every single time you used them, I was able to use his Cygwin environment to log into all of their production servers, which were all Linux. We just piggybacked right through his session, and, again, VPN split tunneling, disable it. Remediation is the workstation on the internal network. When you connect to that VPN, stop letting it talk to the corporate network. And if it does need to talk to the corporate network, it has to go through the VPN and then back out through that firewall, which should deny everything. I get it kind of sucks for your users at that time because they now can't connect to your corporate resources. But at the same time, you shouldn't be constantly working in the production environment if it's supposed to be that segmented environment. You should only be accessing it when you really need to make those changes. And when you do need to make those changes, cut your connection off from the corporate network. The next one is a shared virtual center. I don't know why we see this every now and then. It's kind of a common sense configuration, but when you have a corporate network and you have a virtual center set up for that corporate network, then you have your production network, which is supposed to be highly secure, and it is set up to be segmented, but it's also on the same virtual center, and you can access the virtual machine control or the vCenter through the corporate network. That means if I can log into vCenter, I can now log into either your production network, I'll have physical access to all those hosts, or I can log into your corporate virtual server network. And, dad jokes. I'm a dad now, so I had to throw one in there. We had this pen test, and the client was like, oh yeah, we've completely segmented it. There's no way you're getting in over there. We don't even VPN to get in there. You have to physically go on site, to the other, areas where we have ports enabled to access that network. You have to be physically there. Like, great, that's awesome. And this is storing, hundreds of thousands of healthcare records. So it was pretty good to see that practice. So we're still tooling around on the corporate network. We already had domain admin. Once we have domain admin, we dump the ntds.dit file usually, and we start cracking the NTLM hashes that are in it. It's basically all of your corporate password hashes in NTLM format on the domain controller. So we start cracking those. We cracked 30 or 40 IT admin passwords from it, and we started trying them against vCenter. We found a few that could log in. And so we got into vCenter, and we're looking around in there thinking it's just their corporate vCenter, but I wonder what else is in here. Could we find something interesting? And there is a cluster titled Private Healthcare Network. Interesting. Click Open Server titled Primary Healthcare Database. Okay. Click. And so it pops up the login screen, because it's, again, like having physical access. You're going through Virtual Center. You have pretty much physical access at that point to the machine. And we were like, all right, how do we log into it? They already told us it was on a separate domain. Well, we had their local administrator password they used on their other servers. Their domain administrator password they had been using for their primary admin account. And we thought, maybe it's the exact same domain admin password. Sure enough, it was. We log in and we call our client over, and we have just hundreds of thousands of social security numbers, healthcare records, billing cycles. I mean, these things sell for like $12 a pop. So to demonstrate the impact of what someone would have sold that for, how rich of an environment it was to say somebody is in that environment and they have hundreds of thousands of records, it was a very, highly valuable environment to get into. And it really wasn't all that hard to get into. And to remediate that, separate your virtual center environments in correlation with your network segmentation. So if you have a production network and that needs to be segmented, and you have a corporate network that needs to be segmented, have 2 vCenters set up for it. If you can't do that, then make sure your vCenter, the access to it, the administrative access, only can come from that secure production network. So you already have to be on it to log into it. So conclusion. While a lot of these are seemingly simple to remediate, I didn't drop any O-Day here. I didn't drop any elite hacks. There's just a lot of really basic configuration issues that a lot of companies haven't implemented yet or haven't fixed. And we see them on small companies to large Fortune 500 companies almost every single week across all of our pen testers. And so honestly, please make these easy changes to make my job a little bit harder so we can start focusing on, finding the O-Day or trying to find more creative ways to get in. Because a lot of these things, again, they're fairly simple to get into. And hope you guys valued from this presentation. I guess I do have 1 minute for questions, I think. I don't know where my timing guy is. Oh, I don't want 5 minutes. Can we have 1 minute? All right, who's got a softball? What's up?
With the image tag, are you setting like a URL that seriously has like 445 or are you...
No, so when you're specifying an image tag, you can specify like HTTP:// Instead, we specify file:/2 backslashes. When you do that, it's a Windows UNC path, and it tries to resolve it as an SMB share instead. And so you inject that as the image tag, and it works all the time. Other questions? Way back there. Well, OSCP, really great certification. Huge advocate for it. Taught me a ton. It didn't teach me a lot of these techniques, actually, but it got me started on that footpath. Lots of time spent on Google, building my own labs, looking at, common, resources that are out there. And then when I started working for Rapid7, I work with an amazing team who shares techniques constantly. There's 40 of us on our team, and we're always talking about them. So we're always coming up with new little tricky ways to get the password hash or get what we need to for the day. So yeah, I guess there's no straightforward way to do it. Just a lot of self-research and a lot of time dedicated to trying to learn new tricks. Anyone else? Cool. Well, then I think we're all set. Really appreciate everyone coming and hope you got value from it.